Good morning. Thank you for being here at this relatively early time. It's not the first event at the ITF, but I think it's the most important one so far. We're presenting this report. You have it in front of you, and you have the press release. The press release is also available in other languages, in German, Spanish, and French, if that's your preferred option. I'm delighted to introduce very briefly, because we want to get at the heart of it, 4 distinguished speakers for today's press conference. Let me start at the far end with Mac Urata, who's the Inland Transport Secretary of the International Transport Workers Federation. Then next to him we have Christian Laborde, who is the head of the International Road Transport Union, which is the World Hauliers Association, among some other things. Then we have Anders Kjellström, who represents ACEA, the European Automotive Manufacturers Association. And last but not least, Jose Viegas, the Secretary General of ITF. All these 4 participated in this report, so it represents a broad view. It is not a very particular view, but a broad consensus of organizations with obviously different interests, which I think makes it particularly interesting. And I'll hand straight over to Jose Viegas, who will do the setting of the scene. Anders Kjellström will speak a bit about the technical aspects of autonomous driving with trucks. Christian Laborde will talk a little bit about the operational side, and Mac Urata about the social impact that may have. Thank you very much, and Jose, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning to all of you. We've decided to do this report a little more than a year ago because it was obvious to all of our organizations that the introduction of driverless trucks would bring significant changes in the transport systems and significant challenges with it. Truck automation is already happening today in confined spaces, in port terminals and in mines, but it's coming outside. We have already public trials going on in the US and in Europe, particularly in Europe with the case of platooning. Governments are starting to review regulations to make it possible. We know that automation on highways and motorways is simpler than in cities, not only because there is a much more standardized delimitation of spaces and demarcation of spaces, but also a much more restricted set of users. And the incentives are huge, not only on the more obvious thing, which is that the drivers represent between 35 and 45% of the cost, but also that labor regulations force most trucks to work no more than 8 hours a day. And without a driver, you can have the truck running 24 hours a day. So the daily range is much, much wider. We believe that in 10 years, driverless trucks would be common in many of our roads. And it could also be that the transition would be slower because there are still many hurdles. But it's possible. So there are many decisions to be made. And this report wants to address some of those challenges and decisions. But we have to be ready for a quick transition if that is what is going to be. We means all of us, the governments and the stakeholders, and the case of ITF as a think tank who supports the governments. And we all want, and that's why we all agreed to work together, that the transition happens in an orderly way. As we started the project, we said we don't have doubts if this will happen. The only doubts are when and how. In this report, we have an exploration of when, but we certainly want to make sure that by this dialogue at this phase, we have an orderly how. And that's the purpose of this study and why we are bringing it to you at this moment. Anders?
Thank you, Jose. So I will present to you ASEA's perspective on automation and connectivity, and I will point at 3 key areas for going forward. But just take a quick step back in time to start with. Automation and connectivity is not an all-new area. It's something that the automotive industry has been working on for decades. Already 1 million trucks and vehicles are connected with uptime services, for example, and automated systems and solutions are put in place, such as advanced emergency brake systems that takes over some of the driver's roles while driving. So it's not a new area, but it's an area which is accelerating and expanding. So a large portion of the automotive industry R&D investments of around 45 billion euros annually is now directed towards automation and connectivity in an accelerating way. But there are then some key areas that we think is important to address going forward. And one is that we are able to continue with the large-scale pilots of automated solutions in the public on public roads. That is very important to test the new technology, and it's also important to get the public awareness of the new technologies so that we learn together. So that is one of the key areas. The second key area is that we can call it harmonization throughout Europe, for example. We must avoid a patchwork of solutions and regulations because transportation doesn't know any borders. We need transportation to go cross borders. So harmonization of legislation and regulations is very important so that we have the same exemption procedures and the same standards throughout Europe or other large regions. And the third important area is that of cooperation. I said in the beginning that this is an area which is expanding. In the past, trucks were kind of an isolated device working by itself, but in the future, with automation and connectivity, trucks and vehicles will be an integrated part of a transport solution, and that involves a lot of new key stakeholders. So cooperation is also a key activity to bring all the key stakeholders together and develop these solutions together. So that's why ASEA has been very happy to contribute to this study and report. It's a very complex matter, but we all share the same goal of cleaner transportation, safer transportation, and more efficient transportation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm here for IAU, the World Transport Organization, and we are representing not only trucks, as said before, we are also representing passenger transport, so taxi, bus, and coach, but all with the same background. And I'm very happy that we could have been a partner doing this report together with the Automobile Association and the Workers' Federation, because I think it's very important to be proactive, to manage the change and not only to react on the environment and always looking behind what has been the facts already. So being proactive and looking forward. And I think if the transition period is managed well, so autonomous vehicle will bring significant benefits to this society, as Mr. Viegas already said, for safety, for efficiency, and as well for the environmental protection. So, but if we are looking to our transport operators, we are faced with a big driver shortage at the moment. If you, for example, look to the German market, to bring you an example, but it's the same all over the world. For example, if you look to the Indian market in India, it's 10% of the trucks are standing because there's no driver. And in Germany, we have at the moment 43% of the drivers are older than 50 years. So they will exit the market in the next 10, 12 years. And if you look to the structure, only 3% are aged 25 and less. So you see the big gap in the future for qualified drivers, and we need qualified drivers. And sorry to say this, for the study, we will need qualified drivers in the future as well, because not everything can be done with autonomous vehicles or trucks, and that's why important, and this can be one contribution of the autonomous vehicles, so help to close the gap a little bit better. For example, in Germany, we are estimating 20,000 truck drivers a year as a gap for the next 10 years. So, and if we are introducing autonomous vehicle into the market, this will help to close the gap and will help the industry, because the growing industry needs road transport. It's one of the essentials for our markets. And last remark for the beginning, I think it's as well very important to make the job as a driver more important and more attractive. And in a kind of autonomous truck, you can feel like a pilot of a plane. So it's much more attractive for younger people, because we have to look at that. We don't make the job unattractive, saying in 10 or 15 years there will only be autonomous vehicles and no more truck drivers needed. That's a wrong message to the drivers. We have to tell them we need the drivers, and we show you that the job can be a very attractive one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The International Transport Workers Federation represents millions of transport workers, not just in trucking, but in all modes of transport around the world. And we have seen many changes in our industries since the ITF, the International Transport Workers Federation, was founded in 1896. Once upon a time, horses used to carry people and goods. So changes are often inevitable in our industry, but automation will probably have the biggest and long-lasting impact in our history to all the stakeholders. Benefits, yes, but also at significant costs. Millions of jobs will be disappearing. And it is not just the trucking industry where automation is coming. We see it in ports, warehouses, shipping vessels, trains, buses, taxis, and even on airplanes. So it is very timely that the International Transport Forum initiated this study with the stakeholders of the trucking industry all involved. I believe the key message here is that this is not happening to us, but it is happening with us. Self-driving trucks could reduce the demand for drivers by 50 to 70% in the US and Europe alone by 2030. That would make redundant up to 4.4 million trucking jobs out of the 6.4 million drivers. And that would dissuade many newcomers from coming into the industry. The report says that the earning loss for an average displaced worker is estimated at 20% of the total lifetime earning, and it will be worse off to the less educated and the older drivers. The report further says that the mental and physical impact of job losses will be greater than the losses of income to the well-being of the drivers. And the cost of job loss extends beyond the individual to the family and to the broader community. Often these hardships are not fully recognized or taken in account in the business decisions, says the report. In the railway industry, I know this is about trucking, but in the railway industry, we have experienced about 100,000 job losses in the Argentinian case, and more workers being displaced in Brazil through railway restructuring in the 1990s. And that has been a huge impact to the society as a whole in those countries. But what we are envisaging now is much, much bigger in its impact, and therefore we really need to be prepared. And this will be coming at this age when there will be a permanent reduction in the total number of jobs that are available in our world. The gap between the rich and the poor has widened significantly, and it may even get wider than what we have right now. There is a sharp rise in the non-standard form of employment. And so, will there be full-time salaried jobs available for the displaced truck drivers through automation? That is the question we need to ask. There must be a trade-off between the benefits of the technology against the costs associated with the job losses. And we want just transition, and the fairer taxation must play a part in this transformation. Trade unions will be an equal partner to ensure that this is happening in an orderly way, and I once again would like to thank the International Transport Forum for inviting us, the trade unions, to this study and its research. Thank you very much.
As we said at the beginning, this report was done in very tight collaboration between these 4 organizations. And this is something that makes us very proud. If you have received the business cards of any of us from the ITF and look at the back, you will see something that we strongly believe in. It says, Global Dialogue for Better Transport. And this is a perfect case of that, in which we've gone, invited these partners for this global dialogue. Transport is something that has an impact across people's lives and across companies' lives. It affects all society. And if we try to address a change of this magnitude, for instance, just talking to the vehicle manufacturers, or just talking to the road operators, or just talking to the trade unions, or just talking with the road directors, inevitably we will have a biased and dangerous perspective. We have to consider all these points of view. And that's what we've tried to do. And I hope this is an example for future studies in which the ITF will be able to bring together the relevant stakeholders, because transport is a sector that will have major, major changes in the next 10 to 15 years. 15 years from now, the transport sector across all modes will be very different from today. The only problem being that we don't know in which direction or directions it will evolve. But that depends a lot on the joint efforts of the stakeholders. So we have to make the changes so that things get better and that transitions are harmonious. And that's the purpose of this. We believe that by having these important stakeholders and by your presence here, this report will be very well disseminated and will catch the attention of the relevant political decision makers and the public administration, so that they are aware of the dimension of the challenges that we have. If you read most of the press today, and I'm not blaming you, we hear about the technical wonders, the electronics, how much they can do. We are not hearing about what are the expected speeds of penetration, what are the impacts of that on labor, what are the impacts of that on trade. Those are the important dimensions that have to be addressed. Let me go to the recommendations. We've tried to be very simple in the recommendations. If you have a list of 12 recommendations, it's too many. Nobody reads them. So we've stuck to 4. First one is, before I come to the recommendations, as you may understand, issuing recommendations for 57 countries is a very difficult task, because the situation in Germany will be very different from the situation in my country, Portugal, or from the situation in China, from the situation in Serbia, or in Argentina. So we have to be sufficiently generic in the language and in the scope that the relevant ministries will be able to find here a common body of concepts, and then we'll make the local declination. So we cannot be excessively precise, for instance, for the German case or for the French case, because then this probably would make no sense for the Minister of Chile. So don't find it strange if I use generic sentences in this. The first recommendation is governments should establish a temporary transition advisory board for the trucking industry. Why is this? Because we know what are the technological changes that are coming, but we don't know how fast, we don't know how wide it will come. Inevitably, there will be surprises. This cannot be governed by the ministries with some sort of decree, and then, okay, it's done, and we'll come back in 5 years. This has to be accompanied. And this has to be accompanied with the stakeholders. So this transitional advisory board has to include the stakeholders, at least those that are represented here, but possibly also representatives from the shippers. Second recommendation, consider a temporary permit system to manage the speed of adoption. It's very easy to conceive 2 very different speeds of adoption. A relatively slow one, because people have doubts about whether it works so well or not, but also a very, very quick one, because some hauliers adopted it and they're having great success and they're capturing all the market. And the others want to rush, but then there are not trucks enough to all of them. So governments have to be aware, governments and regulators, and possibly be ready to establish some kind of speed control in each of the countries and in wider spaces, of course, in the case of Europe, at the EU level. We are not saying exactly how that speed control could be. It could be through regulation or taxation, but governments have to be ready to manage that speed. Third, something that Anders already mentioned, it is absolutely critical that we have international standards, road rules, and vehicle regulations for these trucks. It makes no sense that your truck has one set of parameters to travel in Germany, and then it goes to the Czech Republic and has another set of parameters, etc. This is something which maybe many of you know applies to railways. Railways have still today many different signaling systems in Europe. And that's one of the reasons why they've been losing market share. So it is very important that we have here a unified set of rules, which kinds of trucks can use which kinds of roads, and then all the standards for the data communication and all the other things. Fourth, we are very aware that technological progress is not completed now. So we have to continue with the pilot tests and demonstrations. We have to check not only on the vehicle and its relation to the road, but its relation to the telecommunications which are needed to support this. We have to test, for instance, the reliability of that. All of you with your mobile phones have experienced situations in which suddenly the signal becomes very weak. Probably in some cases on the road, the truck will be able to navigate without the remote information, but in others not so much. So the question of the reliability of the IT is as important as of the clarity of the paintings on the pavement. Those things have to be clarified. There have to be those tests. And Anders already mentioned, it's not only for the technical part, but also for the social awareness, that people in the different regions in Europe start getting used to the fact that there will be driverless trucks around here. So it's really to know that this is a complicated process that has to be managed in speed, in standards, in the perception, and to have this advisory board which will be looking across all dimensions and supporting governments to be able to navigate through these waters, which could be tumultuous if we don't do it properly. So those are the recommendations, and now we can go to the questions and answers.
Thank you, Jose, for adding a lot of meat there. That would have been very unfortunate if we would have started questions before. I apologize. So for you to ask questions, we still have more than half an hour, which is excellent. If you have a question, raise your hand. I'll recognize you. Please stand up, say your name, maybe your country and the medium you work for. That would be great. Thank you very much. There's a room microphone. Where's the room microphone? The gentleman over there will come. That's Karen Smith over there, and then we have Jim in the front row after that. Let's take two at a time.
Thank you. I'm Karen Smith from Cape Town, South Africa. I would like to know, what about safety and security? I mean, recently, you know, we've had some incidents in the world. How could, you know, driverless trucks suddenly be hijacked?
Next.
Thank you. Jim?
I'm Jim Motivali from National Public Radio in the U.S. I wanted to get a sense from the panel of the timetable where we might see some of the innovations. We're already seeing platforming, as you show in your cover of your new report. When will that become commonplace, and when will we actually get the driver out of the truck?
Thank you. Maybe Anders can start those questions, answer those questions, and others if they want to join in.
There were two questions, one about safety and security and one about the time schedule. So starting with the safety and security, we from a vehicle perspective, we see much of automation and connectivity actually being driven by safety and security. Much of automated systems and solutions are intended for increasing safety. We very often tie the whole automation roadmap to the active safety systems development. So that's kind of the backbone for automation. And then, of course, when we consider the highest levels of automation, which is completely driverless, then it's a continuous development in order to establish standards and solutions for which are safe. And there are, and then possibly coming a little bit to the timetable also about when these systems are to be introduced. Automated systems are already in place in confined areas, for example, such as mines or ports. There are already automated vehicles transporting goods and people where it's possible and where it's perfectly safe. Then for the public roads, we foresee a kind of a more gradual approach of more and more sophisticated driver assist systems that increases safety. But of course, it cannot be launched until all the safety aspects and security aspects also of the data that is transferred to and from the vehicles is perfectly secure. So timetable-wise, it's hard to tell, but the view is that in confined areas, it's already happening. On public roads, it will be much later. And it's very much driven by safety and security matters.
Jose wanted to answer.
Yeah, I'd like to complement that, starting from the question of the timeline. In the report, we have 3 different timetables for introduction: an aggressive scenario, kind of middle way, and the more conservative scenario. And we explain what they could mean. And we even have, in part of the material that was distributed to you, a comparison of what we see as the penetration curve of this technology compared to other technologies in the market. So the quickest one would be something like 3 years from now, the latest one something like 10 years from now, with the beginning of the series introduction on public roads. On the question of safety, there's something interesting, which is, I think all of us have no doubts that when we come to full automation of all road vehicles, we will have a much safer road system than today. But we know that humans make mistakes, all of us make mistakes. Only 30% of the road crashes are caused by voluntary mistakes because people have drunk before they went to drive or whatever. 70% are done by silly mistakes, non-intentional mistakes. Just because we're human, we get distracted or whatever. We have to understand that the introduction side by side of automated vehicles and human-driven vehicles will generate new type of silly mistakes. And that's also part of the advantage of having these pilots, that we will be having the capacity to observe the new types of mistakes and be aware that they exist and possibly even use the automated vehicles to reduce the factors that have led to those human mistakes of those drivers that are side by side with those vehicles. So there's a learning curve to be made there. In general, nobody doubts that in the later stages it will be a lot safer. We have to make sure that in the transition phases it will not be less safe, because that could damage the whole process. But that's a challenge. It's something that a lot of people think this is the kind of miracle cure and bingo, you're there. No, there's a difficult transition.
Thank you, Jose. There are more questions. Lady in the front and then second row from the back.
Thank you. I'm Patricia Valli from Argentina, Perfil newspaper. I would like to know if there's a measure of how much the conflictivity with workers could be. And for example, in Argentina, 85% of transport is made by trucks. So if what would the negotiation would be like in that scenario of conflictivity?
Thank you. And the lady in the back, second row.
Yes, good morning. My name is Odile Arbeid de Chalanda. I work for IFSTA. IFSTA is a French research transport institute. And I'm also very active in the European Truck Platooning Challenge last year and still going on. So I have two questions. My first question is about and maybe it's addressed to José Viegas. My first question is about this advisory group that you are mentioning. At what level would you place it, since there is a lot of converging initiative from the Commission, European Commission? There is the European Truck Platooning Challenge, there is the Amsterdam High-Level Group, which is the follow-up of the Amsterdam Declaration, etc., etc. So where is the best place for this advisory group, or how can we connect them and make them work together? And the second question is about the status of the driver. What are the future investigation and research that you see, maybe addressing to Anders from Volvo? What is the status of the driver in terms of legal consideration? But what is the status of the driver about what happens in the cabin? And in fact, we have only a few information about this, and IFSTA is, of course, very much interested in addressing this topic.
Thank you very much. So the first question is from Mac, obviously. The second, maybe that's something Christian can jump in and the others can add. And the third one, and Jose was asked directly. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Of course, there are conditions that the trade unions and the workers would like to protect. And if they are to lose the existing jobs, then surely there ought to be a proper negotiations and conclusions about how those job losses will be compensated in new types of employment. Would there be training and other financial incentives to make sure that there is a just transition of those workers who will be losing their jobs? But I also think there will be a lot of new jobs that will be created, not just in the trucking industry, but in other industries through automation and digitalization. And this is really where we would struggle, and so would the employers be struggling to categorize these new jobs. How would they fit in the gradings of your company, etc.? That would be a really hard challenge for both the unions and the employers, in particular for us to make sure that we have our members who can follow those new jobs and their new workplace issues. Also, we would like to know exactly who is our employer. In other words, when automation in trucking comes in full effect, would we have the same employers in the industry that we have been bargaining for many years? Or would it be the freight forwarders or the clients who would be taking over some of those managemental positions? And would we be able to negotiate as much as we have been doing with the good trucking employers until now?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Allow me a short remark. The question was to Mr. Viegas, but to talk about the advisory group. I think these advisory groups has to be different and are depending on the region we are talking about. It can't be one worldwide advisory group because we have completely different surroundings over the world. So let's say we have at least to have one in each part of the world. So for the Americas, for Asia or something like this, it can't be only one. That's one. But you have been asking for the status of the drivers. Come back to a German example, because last week in Germany the legislation was set up for autonomous vehicles. So we have the basic rules now, and if you are asking me for the status of the driver, he's the last responsible one in the current legislation in Germany. But in the study, at least if we are looking to the end and to the real result of the study, we are talking about driverless trucks. So there is no status of a driver because there's no driver in the truck. But in the transition period, you are absolutely right. Looking, for example, to the German legislation, I think we are one of the first countries having this legislation. If you look into it, the status of the driver is he has the last responsibility and he must be ready to take over at any time of the trip.
Let me go to this question of the advisory group. It seems to me obvious that at least at national level, this is indispensable because a large part of the labor regulations are national. A large part of the road usage is national. And there's still, if you look at some of the current discussions, even within the EU, but particularly if you look at the wider European space, there's still a lot of protectionist behavior. And there's still a lot of difficulties about how to enforce the common rules that exist at multinational level. So the national level inevitably will have to be there. I think it would make sense that this would be complemented by, in the case of Europe, a EU level for the advisory function of the things that require harmonization and how to avoid protectionism. Because today, very often, the protectionist measures are invoked on the basis of protecting my labor force. Tomorrow you could have a total reversal because we want to protect the freedom of trade, and so you have to have my driverless trucks penetrate your countries, and other countries may say, no, 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 no. We still have other things to defend. So there is a lot of economic issues beyond the question of introduction of driverless trucks or not so much driverless trucks, or the driver is there for 20% of the functions or whatever. There are wider economic implications, and all of this should be part of the remit for the advisory group. So I would say national and supranational, of course.
Thank you. Are there further questions? We're going back to that side of the room. Maybe we take 3 questions. If you only ask one, please. The gentleman standing up, then the lady in the center, and the lady towards the middle.
Hello, I'm Ignacio Gallegos. I'm from Chile, from Diario Financiero. I wanted to ask you, first, in an era of hackers and where we've seen cyber attacks, is this a concern when we're talking about driverless trucks, and what are we doing to address that concern? And also, if you consider that in 10 years it will be common, as you said, to see driverless trucks in our roads, what's the timetable for Latin America specifically? I know it's not included in the study, but I would like to know if you have kind of a sense of how that would be.
Thank you very much. There's 2 questions, but we can let you get away with it. Lady in the center. Sorry, take it.
Regina Weinrich, the German transport journal Transaktuell. I'm still wondering about your timetable, 3 to 10 years, that I got right.
Beginning. Look at the curves in the report.
Okay, okay, because there are not only autonomous trucks and non-autonomous trucks which have to be integrated, but also the private sector. That seems, to me, a bit short as time range. And then I am wondering about all the legal things that have to be regulated. That takes some time too. And as well the question safety and cybersecurity. And then I'm wondering whether you have a lot about jobs, but very little in your report on technology and progress which has been made in technology and which has to be made. And then I'm wondering about the investments in infrastructure the governments have to take.
Right.
That costs something. You cannot just put a car on the road and then it's driving on its own.
Thank you very much. That's 5 questions, but 3 of them I think we've had already, so that's still okay. And then we have the lady here in the center in the white top.
Hi, my name is Pilar Juarez from Mexico, Millennium newspaper, and I want to know what is the expectation about countries like Mexico that we have all vehicles like 17 years old average, and we also face a lack of operators. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So cybersecurity introduction in other areas than North America and the US and Europe that the study is about, and the time scale seems to be contentious. Who wants to, maybe Anders can talk about cybersecurity.
Yes, I think the naming of this report is quite cleverly chosen, managing the transition and the recommendation of an advisory board and our key point about cooperation. So this involves not only the vehicle industry, it involves also the IT infrastructure and cooperation in order to have secure and safe and IT systems with very high quality. And then of course on the vehicle side, there is development of new electronic architectures that are safer and will protect from hacking and so on. But that's a ongoing development, and it of course should not be possible to hack these autonomous vehicles. But it requires further development and testing as well.
Who wants to speak on the question of Latin America or Mexico and Chile introduction? Jose?
Let me speak a bit about the geographical spread. It is obvious for all of us that it will not be all at the same time, even within the EU, even within the United States of America. Not only for reasons of economic development, but even for reasons of the national or state legislations. Already today in the United States, some states have authorized commercial operations, and others are being very timid about it. In Europe, we should expect similar things. We just heard Germany passed the first national legislation on autonomous vehicles. Other countries are not even starting to work at that. If you go to other continents, it will inevitably be by emulation. And even within a country, for instance, as large as Mexico, or as long as Chile, it will not be in the whole country at the same time. Maybe it will be, for some cases, in cross-border operations. Maybe it will be only in parts of the country where the infrastructure is better or the shippers are more demanding. It has to be managed by the countries and the bilateral relationships among those countries. But once it comes, it will be very tempting for the other operators to say, I want it too. So if the industry is ready to supply the vehicles in the quantities desired, believe me, there will be a lot of pressure from the hauliers and from the shippers so that the governments have it ready. Finally, a question related to the timelines. During the study, which took something like 10 months, we have discussed these calendars of the curves. And 2 times during 10 months, they were anticipated because of the news that were coming up. Never was there a pressure to put them more into the future. We don't know exactly what will happen, but all of us, as we were doing during the study, we felt this might be soon enough that we need to do the study now. Final point on the infrastructure investment. I was very involved in my previous life as a researcher in some of the EU discussions about vehicle-to-infrastructure telecommunication. And today you don't hear much about it because the vehicle industry and the electronics industry understood that governments would not be able, both financially and managerially, to equip the infrastructure if we were depending so much on this type of telecommunication. So today, the expectation is that you will be able to do with a lot less dependency on the, let me call it refurbishing, the electronic refurbishing of the infrastructure as compared to what was the perspective 10 years ago. In any case, here we are dealing with motorway systems, which are systems in which you have a high level of, let me call it, order. It's an organized system. It's properly maintained. And there it should not be a major problem if something is required. And maybe we even require a little more electronic support in the first years while the vehicles are still learning, and then it gets a little less sophisticated. But I would not be, let me put it so, my understanding from what I knew before and from the much I have learned during this study is that it will not be the infrastructure equipment that will be the cause of delay of this change.
Tweak that question a bit and throw it to Christian Labro from a haulier's perspective, from the operator's perspective. What is the timeline you have in mind? I mean, the technology is there, the economic incentive is there. How do you see that as the people who run these trucks?
As you said, the technology is there, but it has to be a business case as well. So that's a view the operators have to have. And if we are talking about the final stage of autonomous driving, this will not only change the technical view, it will as well change the complete operation. We will have new business models because if you have autonomous trucks perhaps running in a platooning way on the motorway, you have to resolve then at certain points, do services into the cities, and there you need a driver again. So who is providing the trucks? Maybe it's a manufacturer. Maybe it's still the transport operator. Maybe it's an Uber. It's maybe a complete new structure. It's not only the technical view we have to look at, and that's why what I said in my first remarks, it's most important to really not to wait and to decide after. It's important to be proactive and really manage the change from all views.
Thank you. We have time for a few more questions. We're going back to this side of the room. I see one question at the back and right in front, the two gentlemen.
Hello, my name is André Giese from the German magazine Verkehrsrundschau. First question is, how do you imagine this temporary permit system? Can you give us an example of how it could work, how it should work? And second question, especially to Mr. Kerström, is do you really want governments to allow only a certain number of autonomous trucks driving on public streets, for example, in 2023, although they are fully developed?
Just in front. Ah, okay. Sorry, let's start over here and then we get to the front row.
Hi, I'm Manuel Schneider from JKU in Austria. My question is to Andreas Kellström. We haven't heard much about the reduction of absolute numbers of vehicles on the road. How does the report capture this reduction, and how do you face it as an industry in terms of job losses and future planning? Thank you.
Thank you. And let's add a question here in the front row. Over here in the center there was a question.
Hi, my name is Wei Zhen and I work for the Today newspaper in Singapore. My question is about Asia. So how different are the scenarios and the issues in Asia as compared to those in the US and Europe?
Thank you. Who wants to answer? Anders was directly asked.
Yeah, so I noted 3 questions here about exemptions procedures and limitations on number of trucks allowed, and about the efficiency and so on. So I tried to address that. What we see about exemptions, to get exemptions in order to test vehicles with autonomous systems, it's important that these exemptions and the procedures are equal throughout the different countries, because we need to test vehicles and solutions in different regions and in different countries, of course. And it becomes for the vehicle and truck industry, it becomes very complicated if the regulations and procedures are very different from country to country. So harmonization of such procedures is very important for for efficiency reasons and for not to hold back this transition. I hope that answers your questions. And then it was about the possible limitations of the number of tests or vehicles allowed. I'm not a very big friend of the view that the vehicle industry is kind of pushing technology and that the governments should be holding back for certain reasons. I think it's more that we should work together and find solutions. So I'm not a friend of someone is pushing and someone is holding back. I think it's more of a collaborative effort that is necessary, so cooperation is the key. Then was a question about efficiency and the possible reduction of the total number of trucks. Our main view is that transportation need will continue to go up as it's tightly connected to economic growth. And with better logistic systems, we always try to improve the efficiency of truck and the efficiency of transportation. But there's not foreseen a dramatic drop in the number of transports and the number of trucks. In fact, congestion and more efficient utilization of the road infrastructure is one of the keys in order to sustain and to keep the economic growth. So that's not a key scenario, I would say.
Then there were two questions about how the permit system would work. Maybe that's something for Jose, and also the question about Asia, and that's maybe for the IRU, which is very active in Asia, I know.
Let me start by picking up on the last point on the question of efficiency. One of the collateral benefits of having driverless trucks is that they can operate 24 hours a day, and so you can spread the number of trucks across the day and the night. So if the total freight volume being transported in ton kilometers stays the same, if the capacity of the vehicle stays the same, but they operate across 24 hours instead of mostly across 12 hours, the number of trucks at the peak hour in the most used roads would be lower than today. But there's a lot of ifs that I put in my sentence. So those are not guaranteed. And that's another reason why we need this accompanying system, this monitoring advisory board. Because it's very easy to have scenarios in which the total volume of traffic by road increases and others in which decreases. So it has to be monitored. The question of the temporary permits, it's also part of the transition management, but it's something that, for instance, Austria had for some years ago with the eco points, and only so many trucks could come into the country at a certain time for different reasons. But what we see here is that if we want to manage the process, it may be, and we just say consider, we are not even recommending, we're saying consider the possibility because of this managing the transition in an harmonious way. And that's the purpose there. Then on Asia, maybe you can say something?
If you allow not only on Asia, but as well to the permit system, sure. Because I think from our use point of view, it's very important that as Jose said already, it's considered to have a permit system. What we absolutely should avoid is restricting technical progress by such a permit system, or taxing innovation or whatever on ideas you can imagine on this point. So that's why, as well, in the beginning I said we should manage this change together, and that's why the advisory board is so important, or maybe so important. From my personal point of view, we should avoid any restrictions and permit system, because if you look to the past, it always restricted progress and technical progress. Going back to the question to Asia, it's I think from the background of the study, to make it not too much complicated, we concentrated on the US market and on the European market. What we have to do in the future to look at the results of the study and compare it with the markets in other parts of the world. It's the same for South America and of course for Asia. I think in Asia, in some parts, you are much far than we are in Europe. On others, maybe the Europeans are a little bit faster on the move. Give us a time to check and compare for the other parts of the world. That what IU will do, because as I said in the beginning, we are representing we are representing more than 100 countries in the world, so we are present on all parts of the world, and we have to look at it.
Let me just say one thing. Let me just explain why we did it for Europe and North America. Very simple, data availability. For the other parts of the world, the data available on the market size, the age structure of the drivers, things like that, was simply not available with a minimum of quality that we could have used it. So there was no intention of discriminating like it's just because the Europeans and the Americans. No, it's really about the availability of the data. And if for other continents we have similar quality of data, it will be relatively simple to do kind of adaptation of the study there and see what are the pressures on the supply and demand of labor and how it could come. Then we can come to something like the quality of the infrastructure. We know, for instance, in Asia, if you look at what was the existence, I saw a piece on LinkedIn last week which shocked me. I have been there many times, but this was let me call it a brutal reminder, which was the map of metro systems in China in the last 25 years. 25 years ago, you had one line in Beijing, something like 10 kilometers. Today, you have metro systems in, I think, 80 cities, and the total length is approaching quickly the 100,000 kilometers in 20 years. This is at a speed of growth of infrastructure that is totally stratospherically higher than whatever we have been able to do in Europe. So it could be that at least in some parts of Asia, once you start, it gets very fast. In others, it could be as slow as here. We don't know. But we could not even chart the beginning, the early graphics, because the data on labor was simply not there.
Thank you very much. We are perfectly on time. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for asking.
I have to say one thing. Daniel, come here, please. I want you to meet the guy who was the project manager. Credits are due. At least as an academic, I always like to do that. Come on, Daniel. This is our colleague, Daniel Verriard. He was the project manager.
Yes. And so if you have technical questions, he's the guy to explain the graphs and the curves. If you don't get it, just chase him down. Daniel is the lead author here. Thank you all very much. You now know who the people are that can give you a quote if you didn't get it at some point, now on the break or some other time during the event. Some of them you will see again in the panel on rules for automated driving at 11, I think. That'll be an interesting discussion. Thank you for coming. Good luck with that story. If you need anything else, come to us. We'll try and help you. Thank you. Have a good day.
Good. Thank you.